So Andrew Crosson is a Foreign Service officer in the consular track. He's serving his first tour in Consulate General of Matamoros in Mexico. He graduated from Stanford University in Alabama, with a major in Spanish and literature, and double minors in English and world languages and cultures. His second tour, his next assignment, which he will undertake next year, will be in Bangkok, in Thailand. He will be serving 1 year as a consular officer and the next year as a political officer. And I've known Andrew since September 2011. As Camille said, he is my supervisor. I'm doing a virtual internship with the State Department. It's called the Virtual Student Foreign Service. And I'm also co-president of the BYU Foreign Service Student Organization. We made this trip possible to have Andrew come address us in what the Virtual Student Foreign Service is and why social media matters. And I just want to let you know that every time that I've talked with Andrew, so since my internship is virtual, our communication is usually through email or Skype. But every time I talk with him, I just have this impression that how smart this man is. And I feel so blessed to be working with him. So please join me in welcoming Andrew Crosson.
Good afternoon. My name is Andrew Crosson, like Mauricio said, and thank you very much for the kind words, and thanks to BYU and the FSSO for bringing me here. I'm actually the first virtual student foreign service supervisor to have been able to go and meet his or her intern in person, travel to their school, and speak like this. So very thankful to BYU for making that possible. I spoke this morning on specifically the virtual student foreign service and the internship that the State Department provides to connect students with foreign service officers in an internship that keeps them out of harm's way. One, if we can't send interns really to Baghdad or Peshawar or Kabul. So it also manages to help the interns save money because they don't have to pay for a flight over there or pay to support themselves for a semester overseas at an embassy. While it also provides a great opportunity for the State Department for foreign service officers to get some of our tasks done. I think it's fair to say that the majority of the foreign service, we are all extremely busy. We all have a whole lot of things to do because diplomacy obviously is a very big task. And so it helps to have an intern from time to time to help us accomplish tasks and give them that experience. And it also is extremely self-fulfilling because I've been able to give Mauricio a lot of advice and information about the Foreign Service to help him make a decision about pursuing a career with the State Department. So I'm very excited to be here. He gave you most of my background and resume with the State Department. The thing that I think is extremely relevant to you all as students is I joined the Foreign Service directly out of school. I graduated in May 2010 from Stanford University and was hired officially, or my first day on the job with the State Department was September 2010, so just a few months later. So if you're interested in a career in the Foreign Service, I highly recommend that you just go ahead and get started and throw yourself into the process and see what happens. You don't have to wait until you have a lot of experience under your belt and whatever it is that you're studying. You can get a career in the State Department just out of college. So just take that as an encouragement. I'm going to be talking today about Diplomacy 2.0, or why social media matters. You may have heard recently that the State Department is kind of starting a new push into the 21st century to really engage with the public and engage with people that really the State Department has never been very good at engaging with in the past. So I usually walk around when I speak, and I'm kind of pinned to this podium for now. So if I start to wander over there, just kind of point me back over here to the podium. But we're going to start off with why social media, what's the point of me coming to speak about social media specifically. I'm sure that you're all extremely familiar with Twitter and Facebook and all of that stuff. So I'm not going to teach you, I'm not going to lecture to you about why Facebook is useful or how people use it, because the majority of us are using it right now. Really, we are the ones pushing this change in the State Department. People our age are the ones that are joining the Foreign Service, getting into the U.S. Diplomatic Corps and saying, we really should be using these things. Why aren't we? So to start off, I'm just going to give a few kind of bullet points of why social media. Nearly 4 in 5 active internet users visit social networks and blogs. It's important to remember that statistic is worldwide. A lot of times our view is just us here in the United States, especially college students. We live on Facebook, we live on Twitter. But the key to that, the really important part, is it's worldwide. So the world literally is on the internet and is visiting social network websites and reading blogs. And that's why we have to go out and engage with them there. Americans, of course, we all know this, spend more time on Facebook than any other website, which is really kind of pitiful for us, I guess, as Americans. But again, this is where we spend our time. And the next 2 points, social networking apps are the third most used among U.S. Smartphone owners. Can anybody guess the other 2 more used applications on smartphones off the top of your head? So games, and then weather. And then after that, it's social media applications. And then last, social media takes power from hierarchy, from government, from kind of the ivory tower, and it really puts power in the hands of the average citizen. And that's what I'm going to talk about today, kind of the shift of power and the State Department's response to that shift of power. So 21st Century Statecraft is something that has really been pushed forward as an effort by Secretary Clinton since she took office to really bring the State Department into the 21st century. She took office in 2008, of course, and 8 years into the 21st century, and finally someone said, oh yeah, we really should kind of move forward, shouldn't we? And so this quote is from Secretary Clinton. I'm not going to read the whole thing because you all can read. But the key there is this is 21st century statecraft, complementing traditional foreign policy tools with newly innovated and adapted instruments of statecraft that fully leverage the networks, technologies, and demographics of our interconnected world. So this really sums up what 21st century statecraft is, and then for the rest of my presentation, I'm going to unpack that a little bit. So really, what is 21st century statecraft? I've come up with 3 main points of what I think 21st century statecraft really is. The first is key, and it's communication. As you all know, I'm preaching to the choir when I tell students it doesn't take a long time to communicate around the world anymore. But if you read memoirs or biographies of old Foreign Service officers who operated in the diplomatic corps in the 20s, 30s, 40s, you read that they send telegrams back and forth to the department. They communicate. They literally get around the world on boats and planes, and it takes months and months at a time to arrive at whatever diplomatic assignment you have. One in particular is a guy named George Kennan. I read his biography recently, Foreign Service officer mainly in Russia and Eastern Europe. And he tells a story in his biography that while he was serving in Lisbon, Portugal, he was kind of the forefront knowledge base of an issue that was developing in Portugal. He received a telegram from the State Department in Washington, D.C. that said, we need you to come brief us on this developing topic. And so he said, sure, I'm on my way back. And 3 months later, he arrived in Washington, D.C. after taking boats from Portugal, for some reason ended up down the coast of Africa, over to Brazil, and then up to Washington, D.C. So 3 months after Washington's request for information, he arrives at the office and says, okay, here I am, let's talk about, and I find that ridiculous today. It's impossible to imagine for our generation it taking 3 months for a person to arrive at a place just to give a briefing, right? Because today, we just pick up a phone and you just have a conversation with somebody. Or even more so today, you just start up a Skype video conference and you've accomplished the exact same thing in literally a fraction of what it used to be in the past. So the next part of 21st Century Statecraft that's key is engagement. To really connect with your audience, you have to reach them on their terms where they are. In the past, it was easy for the State Department to be a fire hose. And from its pedestal in Washington, D.C., to just open up and unleash to the press and the public and say, here is our foreign policy. Everyone, please come, gather around and let us tell you what U.S. foreign policy is and what we're doing overseas. And it's not like that today. No one is really interested in going there to D.C. to find out what foreign policy is when you can just go to the State Department website and read about these things. Even more so, go to social media platforms and social media pages for specific diplomatic missions and find out what they're doing that day. Again, it goes back to we can't really imagine how it used to be. But today, this is the way we operate. And the where they are part is really key to engagement, and I'm going to talk about that later in the presentation. And then the last part of 21st Century Statecraft that I've identified is innovation. So you have to be open, really, to change and to embrace new technologies. This is the part that the State Department is getting better at, but as you can imagine, it struggles with just a little bit. And I'll talk about that when we get to the innovation portion of the presentation. So we're going to start off talking about communication in general and the use of social media for communication in diplomacy. We're going to start with Mike McFall. This is the new U.S. ambassador to the Russian Federation. He recently began there just a few months ago, and he's kind of a leading example of an ambassador really engaged on Twitter. He actually first started using Twitter when he became ambassador of Russia, has a great Twitter name of just McFall, and has really collected a lot of followers in Russia and around the world very quickly once he became the ambassador to Russia. Really started using social media, and he's using it really, really well. So I've highlighted a couple of his tweets that I'm going to pop up here. First one is he's tweeting about a meeting that he had with two Russian actors in Russian foreign policy. And he's trying to explain Jackson Vanik, which, if you're not familiar, it's a U.S. trade law from the 70s that was an attempt to kind of influence the former Soviet Union in trade and all that kind of stuff. It still stands today. There's questions in current U.S. policy about whether or not it's still useful, and I'm not going to comment on that. But so here he is tweeting just to the public that he's having a meeting about Jackson Vanik. The follow-up tweet is actually in Russian. He speaks Russian fluently, and I don't, but I'm pretty sure that this is talking about the same thing, and he links to a Russian news website that reports on his meeting. So just in two tweets, this is 19 March, so literally a couple of days ago, he's tweeting about what the U.S. foreign policy makers in Russia are doing. And it's direct access to an ambassador. Years ago, you would never have had this. You would have been lucky to meet an ambassador. And here, you just go to his Twitter page, follow him, and you're literally finding out what he's doing on a day-to-day basis. The third one that I think is a really strong example of diplomacy via social media, this is Ambassador Dmitry Rogozin. He's actually a Russian ambassador who recently became, I think it's Deputy Premier of Defense something in Russia. And he's tweeting about a meeting that he had with McFall again on that day, just saying we talked about missile defense, Afghanistan, other policy issues. To me, that tweet right there is the embodiment of diplomacy via social media, of 21st century statecraft. He's admitting publicly in a very public venue on his Twitter page, we're meeting, we're talking. These are the things we're talking about. And later on, he goes on to tweet about, providing links to information about things they talked about and all of that. And really, it gives you a direct access that has never really happened before. The other way that communication is important, not only for furthering U.S. policy, which is what the McFall's tweets are, you get just kind of interesting, unique insight into an ambassador's life. So John Roos is the U.S. ambassador to Japan, and his Twitter account became extremely popular last year in the Japanese earthquakes. I don't know if you guys followed the earthquake story much, but he was he increased in followers in the tens and tens of thousands almost instantly because his Twitter account was the one that was publishing information on behalf of the U.S. government about the U.S.'s response in Japan. So he was literally tweeting everything from, just got a report from this city, unfortunately everyone perished, or we just found this American citizen who was buried in this house, or the U.S. is sending this, shipment of supplies, or is bringing in this defense response group. Literally, he was practicing diplomacy with Japan via his Twitter page. And he has a whole lot of followers, both Japanese and Americans, who are just kind of monitoring. What's he doing? What's he talking about? The tweets I'm going to highlight for him are actually pretty funny. These are from last night. And he's tweeting about an eating contest that they had in Japan. I'm not familiar with Japanese culture, but I clicked on the link, and basically it's some sort of like noodle or rice eating contest. And he's just like being a normal guy. He's tweeting on his Twitter page about, would you participate in this eating contest? The second tweet is the same thing in Japanese. And then here he is tweeting about Cyndi Lauper supporting the sake industry in Fukushima. And while it seems strange, and it seems like, what's the point? Why is this diplomacy? Why is this worth highlighting? Diplomacy is foreign policy, but diplomacy is also sharing information and sharing culture. And so he is engaging with Japanese culture via his Twitter page. And Japanese citizens are visiting his Twitter page and looking at it and saying, okay, this is an American who is invested in our culture. And he saw this random eating contest, and here he is commenting about it. He has conversations with Japanese citizens via his Twitter page quite often, actually. But I show you McFall and I show you Ruse as examples of different ways you can utilize social media, or especially Twitter, to engage the public. So on the one hand, you have McFall tweeting about policy issues. And on the other hand, you have Ruse tweeting about cultural exchange. Both of them do both things. I'm not saying that one is better than the other, but I'm saying that these are really good examples of how you can use social media in 21st century statecraft. So another example of 21st century statecraft using communication is DipNote. I'm not sure if you're familiar with this, but this is the official U.S. State Department blog. And every couple of days, there's a post from a major player in Washington, D.C., or a Foreign Service officer serving overseas. This one is actually from a consular officer at the U.S. Embassy in New Delhi, basically just posting what it's like to interview Indian students who want to come to the United States. This is actually a lot of what I do. For the past year, I've been interviewing Mexicans who want to get a visa to come to the United States. And many of them don't understand our processes, right? They walk up to our interview window and have a few minutes to make their case of why they qualify for a visa. And sometimes people can walk away really misunderstanding the decision that we made, why we made it. And so this consular officer in New Delhi has written a really long blog post, actually, about what it's like specifically for Indian students when they walk up to an interview. What is that consular officer thinking? And how is that consular officer making a decision? The importance of this as diplomacy is, again, we're reaching out to the citizens of the country in which we're serving and providing them insight. We're providing them information that they find valuable and useful. So it doesn't have to happen with social media in the way that we call social media of Twitter and Facebook. It can happen via blogs, or wherever it is that your audience is where you have to go and meet them. Of course, it wouldn't be a presentation if I didn't try to plug some State Department programs. So if you will allow me just a second to talk about the Smart Travel Enrollment Program. I know a lot of BYU students travel all over the world quite frequently. This program allows you basically to enroll with us and let us know where you are, so that if there is an emergency or a crisis, we can find you better. And I promise I'm going somewhere with this. So it's called STEP. You can find it at travel.state.gov. If you go there, you can type in kind of what trips you're taking, when you'll be there, how long you'll be there, about where you're going to be, how to contact you in country. And with that information, in the event of an emergency, we can contact you. For example, a large earthquake in Japan, or this past week, an earthquake in Mexico City that luckily didn't cause widespread destruction, but had it caused huge destruction and you were in Mexico and you had registered with us, we would specifically make efforts to find you. We wouldn't just walk around, and we do sometimes go around hospitals and airports and hold up an American flag and look for American citizens. But if you had registered with us and told us, I'm going to be in the state of Oaxaca on these specific dates, and I'm going to be staying at this hotel, if the earthquake had caused massive damage, we would have looked at our registrant system, saw that you were going to be there, and specifically tried to find you so that you would be okay, make sure that you would be okay. So that's the reason why I'm plugging STEP. But the other reason why I'm talking about STEP is because it's a really good example of how 21st Century Statecraft is kind of pushing the State Department forward, not only in foreign policy, but also in services to American citizens, right? Because our main goal, the U.S. State Department main goal overseas, is to provide services to American citizens, and then to look out for their interests, and then further foreign policy, U.S. policy. So traditionally, in an emergency, let's say the Japan earthquake, 20 years ago, it would have looked like this. You would have started with an emergency message to U.S. citizens, which is cleared in Washington, and then it's cleared to go out. Then we would have sent an email via STEP or through the registration system. It used to be something else. Then that email would be distributed to the wardens. And wardens it's still in process. It's still in place today. But basically, we would look for volunteers, American citizen volunteers, expats living in the country. We would say, hey, would you be willing to amplify our message if we need you to? Would you be willing to network with American citizens in your area and help us contact other American citizens if we need you to? Those are the wardens. Then the wardens would direct people to our website where you could find more information about whatever emergency message that we had. It's a linear system. It doesn't happen at the same time, and it's actually kind of clunky, right? It's kind of slow. Today, in the 21st century, it looks more like this. We create an emergency message, and at the same time, it's posted on Facebook. We tweet about it. It goes out to STEP registrants. It's posted on our website, and we still contact our wardens for people who aren't necessarily using social media or the internet and won't get our message quite as quickly. Clearly, huge difference. One is linear. Every step in the process has to be completed. It takes time. The other one, everything goes out at the same time. The example that I'm gonna use now is actually a real-life example that I was directly involved in this past December. In December, you may have heard, in Mexico, there were some attacks on public buses in the state of Veracruz. And basically, people affiliated with the drug wars boarded a bus and just opened fire on a couple of different buses. A couple people were killed. Really tragic situation. Obviously, as the U.S. Foreign Service overseas, one of our biggest things is to provide this kind of information to American citizens on security, developing security situations. And so for the first time, we created our emergency message, and then we posted it on Twitter. As soon as our message went out, we put it on Twitter. And that's this square here. Oh, yeah. So this is the tweet that went out. Emergency message for U.S. citizens. Bus attacks in northern Veracruz state. And then a link to our website. And that's the same thing above in Spanish. You can see we currently have 450 followers. At the time, we only had like 220, I think. So this is back in December. Very small following. And that's the first tweet that went out right there. 5:37 p.m., we sent it to our followers, 270 followers. At 5:39 p.m., 2 minutes later, it was retweeted by a Brownsville, Texas reporter. Matamoros is right on the border with Texas. And at 5:39 p.m., she found our tweet and retweeted it to her 220 followers. Then at 5:43 p.m., it went out to over 2,000 followers of the U.S. affiliate for Univision on the U.S. side of the border. So obviously it's a Hispanic news media organization. They tweeted it to their followers in the local Rio Grande Valley area in Texas, and it hit 2,000. So literally in the span of 6 minutes, it's reached well over 2,500 people, right? Then at 5:44, 1 minute later, it was retweeted again to 1,500 followers of a local Fox News affiliate in Texas. And then within the hour, it was found by a CNN staff writer based in New York who covers the Rio Grande Valley, Lower Texas, and Mexico area as part of his beat. He retweets our story, or our original message, to his 991 followers. And here's where that really gets important. CNN, an hour later, posted on their website, on their CNN breaking news Twitter feed, which reaches over 6 million people. So within the span of an hour and a half, we reached over 6 million people from one tweet, even though we only started with 270. The point I'm trying to make here is this is 21st century statecraft in the sense of serving Americans overseas. In the past, it would have been an email that would have then been distributed to wardens, who would have then picked up the phone and called people. It's not like that anymore. Our message gets out immediately, and this is information that's important because if you're an American citizen living in Veracruz, you probably want to know that buses were attacked and people were killed, right? You'd want to know that as quickly as possible, and that's our job to provide you that information. So the next part of 21st century statecraft that I'm going to highlight is the engagement part. Engagement is the key to 21st century statecraft because you can communicate all you want, but it's all about who's listening, right? It's about who's trying to get information from you. The key to engagement is meeting your audience where they are with relevant content. I mentioned this at the beginning. The where they are is key. In the United States, we're familiar with Twitter, Facebook, maybe Google+, if you're really on the cutting edge of social media in the United States. But think about the rest of the world. In China, they don't use Twitter, they use Baidu. In Brazil, they don't use Facebook, they use Orkut. And so we have to be present where the people are and using the services that they are using. Because in Brazil, no one's going to go to our Facebook page. They're going to go to our Orkut page because that's the service that they use. In China, they're definitely not going to visit our Twitter feed, but they'll look at us on Baidu. The key part about that is relevant content. The second key part is relevant content. You can't just go out and start tweeting whatever. You can't spend your whole time doing what Ruse does, tweeting about an eating contest. While that's interesting and it keeps your people engaged, eventually they're going to get tired of finding out about eating contests. They want some meat. They want some foreign policy. They want to know what the U.S. is doing. So you have to provide both. You have to provide interesting with just kind of the hook to keep you coming back. Citizens help create and amplify the message, and there's a constant demand for more. So with the engagement that we're doing with the State Department, it's revolutionizing the way we've engaged people in the past. Like I said before, it used to be, here's the fire hose of the State Department, just absorb what we give you. And now it's the citizens coming to us and saying, give us more. We want this. Inform us about this. And so we're having to respond to the citizens. And it's really an effort from citizens of whatever country we're operating in or the U.S. citizens of really giving them the information that they want. The next two parts about engagement is involving parameters of engagement. That basically just means that we have to constantly shift our focus or constantly shift our response to follow the citizens where they go. So for example, 10 years ago, there was no Twitter. We would never have thought about Twitter, right? And even 5 years ago, Twitter was just kind of getting started. Twitter just turned 6 the other day. And the State Department has really only embraced Twitter in the last few years. So it's constantly evolving. This game of social media and 21st century statecraft is constantly changing at an extremely rapid pace, which is something that's been kind of difficult for the State Department to keep up with because it's a very large organization and it takes time to kind of shift direction like that. And then, of course, create themes that must be responded to. These are things like the Arab Spring, or what I'm going to show you coming up is the Summit of the Americas in Colombia. We have to engage these themes that come up to make sure that we're engaging the citizens as well. So an example of engagement is a tweet that ended up going viral in Brazil. You probably didn't hear about this. It didn't make U.S. news very much. But a couple of months ago, there was a major Iran policy happening on a multilateral level. Brazil was a major player in this policy, and we're trying to get Brazil to cooperate with us and kind of take our side, more or less, because that's, of course, diplomacy. Brazil didn't really seem like they were going to do it. So a key player in the State Department sent a tweet to the Brazilian equivalent of Jon Stewart, so The Daily Show guy, the Brazilian equivalent of him in Brazil. They had met before, and started following each other on Twitter. And so he sent a tweet specifically to that guy and said, watch this video, check out this information. Could you do us a favor and share this with your followers? He shared that with his followers, and within days, the U.S. foreign policy view of the Iran decision that was coming up was almost fully supported by the average Brazilian citizen, to the contrary of what the Brazilian government was planning on doing. And it eventually it created such a stir and went so viral in Brazil that it caused Brazil's leadership to basically change the decision they were going to make because their citizens were speaking out, which is incredible. And that is diplomacy 2.0, right? That's 21st century statecraft. So there's a couple of examples of the State Department involving using engagement. And as I mentioned before, there's a big difference between interaction and preaching. Earlier, years ago, it used to be the State Department would preach the message. Now it's the State Department is engaging and interacting with people to get the message across. So here's an example of a good usage of engagement in 21st century statecraft. Unfortunately, I'm not going to play the video, but this is a clip from YouTube. This guy is a consular officer serving in Tijuana, Mexico. And it's a video that the U.S. Consulate General in Tijuana made that explains how to apply for a visa, and which is extremely valuable information to the average Mexican, right? All of them living on the border would love to have a tourist visa to be able to come and shop in the United States. But the process is admittedly slightly difficult. There are a couple of different steps, and if you don't do it in the right order or if you don't do it right, you're not going to be able to accomplish the task of getting a visa. So they created a video in Spanish with an American officer walking people through the process. And in the span of maybe 6 months, it gets up to 250,000 views on YouTube, which is huge. I mean, that's a pretty popular YouTube video that is being viewed by people who generally may not have a computer in their home. Or if they do, they don't use it very much, and yet they're still watching this video to find out how to apply for a visa. Another good example is coming up for the Summit of the Americans in Colombia. The State Department is actually taking questions via Twitter, and they're going to answer questions via a Twitter chat later. So the average Colombian citizen or U.S. citizen, or really anywhere in the world, can tweet to the State Department and ask a question using the tag AskState. Those questions will be collected in Washington, and then someone will respond to the majority of the valid questions, right? So here's just a screenshot. This is last night of just a few of the questions that are coming up for the Summit of the Americas, which is occurring in April next month. This is the website that the Embassy Bogota has created for the Summit of the Americas. And there's a few things on this website that I really want to point out. First is there's a contest. It's based on YouTube. They're asking Colombian citizens to create videos, submit them to the embassy, and then the embassy will choose some winners based on the competition rules. It's really not important what the competition is about so much as that there is a competition on YouTube. We're using, for one of the first really strong examples, really very large public examples, we're using YouTube to engage Colombian citizens to get them thinking about what's the point of the Summit of the Americas? What are the major policy issues? How do they feel about it? How do they want to express to the United States how they feel about it? The second thing I want to point out is down the right side of the page, of course, they have a Twitter feed right on their page. You would never have found this a year ago on any U.S. mission website. But recently, the State Department has developed the capability of adding Twitter feeds to their website to highlight the fact that they are out in front of this. They are out there where the people are on Twitter, engaging them about the Summit of the Americas coming up next month. And then the last thing I want to point out is the Flickr photo stream. Of course, Flickr is another photo service for social media, adding photos and kind of being able to browse them at will by the public. And the fact that they're even showing these photos is huge. Normally, people get their photos from the AP or Reuters or the USA Today paper that they're reading. But here you can go and literally see inside photos of foreign leaders having conversations, committees discussing issues related to some of the Americas. This is huge. I mean, the fact that there is a dedicated page with all of these different aspects is really strong development for 21st century statecraft. This is the homepage of the State Department, and I pointed out for a couple of reasons. First is right here, the top right corner, stay connected with the State Department, with state.gov, and all of those different buttons are related to social media somehow. You've got DipNote, the blog, Twitter, Tumblr, RSS feeds, Facebook, Flickr, YouTube, Google+. We're out there. The State Department is making an effort to get out to where the people are. Then right under that, of course, Twitter feed, just highlighted that for some of the Americas. And then there's My State Department. This is actually really new, and I want to spend some time talking to you guys about My State Department. I have a screenshot here of what that looks like. Basically, it allows a person to go to the State Department website, which is a huge wealth of information. Everything about U.S. foreign policy you can find on the State Department website. But before this service, it would have been really hard to find, and it wouldn't have been in a really accessible manner that people like you and I are beginning to demand. Now you can go log in, and you have all these widgets down the left side of the page on different policy issues, things specifically from the Secretary, and then you can scroll down and there's more topics. Each one of those you click and it creates a box on your page where you can follow what's going on in the State Department related to those issues. So for example, this is just from last night. I added the State Department's Twitter page. I added 21st Century Statecraft as a subject. So anything the State Department is doing that's related to 21st Century Statecraft will show up for me right there every time I visit the page. Then conflict and stabilization is something I'm interested in. I live in the middle of a very large conflict called the drug war in Mexico. And so these things that the State Department is doing really interest me. And so I've added that to my page. And then, of course, the help box I wanted to include for you guys so you could see a little bit more about what the page is like. This page is constantly updated automatically based on the topics that you've selected. So if you're interested in foreign policy, if you're interested in what the State Department is doing, you don't have to go click all over the website to try to find the information you're looking for. You can go to this page that the State Department has created for you that is customizable to what you want and the topics that you're interested in. So the last part of Diplomacy 2.0 is innovation. I highlighted this before. But the key part of this is large bureaucratic organizations, especially the government, tend to resist change. Hopefully they're not going to watch this video podcast when I say that the State Department is really slow. And it takes a lot to change the direction of the State Department, of any very large organization, especially governmental. But the Secretary's push for this has made it very important that the State Department get out in front of this, because we see this as the future. Social media, the internet, interconnectedness, all of this is where diplomacy is heading, and we want to be right there. As an example of a really good development that Secretary Clinton put in place, she created a new advisor position that has never existed before called the Senior Advisor for Innovation in the Office of the Secretary. The current advisor is named Alec Ross. He served on President Obama's social media campaign during President Obama's presidential campaign, and then later transitioned to the State Department, and has really started a lot of new developments that I'm going to highlight here. But there's a quote that I found from Alec Ross that I think is really key to what Diplomacy 2.0 is. If Paul Revere had been a modern-day citizen, he wouldn't have ridden down Main Street. He would have tweeted. And that really is the future. That's what's happening in the Arab Spring. That's what's happening when an earthquake happens in Japan. That's what's happening when Libya goes into an uproar based on what's going on with its leadership. This is what's happening during the Russian presidential elections that happened just a few weeks ago. Everything is taking place on social media in real time at lightning fast pace. So some of the things that Alec Ross has done to kind of push the State Department forward have actually been the result of necessity. I thought about actually putting on the slide innovation is the result of oftentimes, unfortunately, tragedies or major disasters. When something occurs and we look at the situation and say, man, if only we had a way to respond to this better. If only we had thought of this first. But a lot of the things I'm going to highlight are the results of tragedies. So the Red Cross donation system for Haiti was one of those huge developments from the State Department that occurred really quickly that has actually been a key player in everything else that's happened since Haiti. So January 2010, the Haiti earthquake happens. Within days, the State Department has organized the Red Cross and two other wireless organizations to begin functioning as a donation point for people who have a cell phone. And you probably all remember, you can send a text to 90999 with the word Haiti and automatically donate $10 to Haiti. and that was subtracted from your cell phone bill at the end of the month. And that was a way that citizens all over the world, especially the United States, could immediately engage themselves in the disaster that occurred in Haiti. That had never been done before Haiti. And the State Department was the reason that it happened. The State Department said, we need a way to get money to Haiti fast. And we need a way to let American citizens engage in this huge diplomacy opportunity. Within days, they created this text message system. The next one you guys have probably heard about is Ushahidi. Ushahidi is an online platform basically that lets people map developments in a country. It started in, where did it start? I don't remember exactly where it started, but Ushahidi in Swahili means testimony or witness. And basically it started as a way for local citizens in that country to report acts of violence or acts of crimes that occurred or things that needed to be out in the public. And it allowed them to report this in an anonymous way. And then the Ushahidi people create a map online, and all of this stuff gets documented in the public view, which brings attention to the problem. But at the same time, it also has a really positive usage. So Ushahidi responded in the Japanese earthquake disaster, and it allowed people to contact Ushahidi through text messages or social media and say, hey, I'm alive. I'm here. Put me on a map. And then people can go and look at the map and search by name, search by location, and say, okay, has my loved one or has my family member reported in? Are they okay? Ushahidi is something supported by the State Department. It's a non-governmental organization. It's a whole different open source organization, but the State Department is putting its weight behind it because we see the value in their product. And then lastly is the Virtual Student Foreign Service, which is my connection to coming to BYU today. The Virtual Student Foreign Service is a tool for 21st century statecraft because it allows us as foreign service officers to connect with a student in the United States and then that student can connect with the host country nationals that we're working with. So there's a lot of different virtual internship projects. Mauricio helped me revamp our local website, the U.S. Consulate General Matamoros, to provide better information about the visa application process to the average Mexican citizen. And although he's in Utah and he has never come to visit in Matamoros, the information that he has created for us is being read and utilized by Mexican citizens who want to get a visa to the United States. That is also diplomacy. We all think of diplomacy as this big foreign policy issues, but it's also just providing information, facilitating travel, encouraging people to get interested in the United States and its culture, and developing exchange. So another way that you can get involved in the Virtual Student Foreign Service is, for example, teaching English via Skype. 1 hour a week, you volunteer as an intern, and you can teach English to a group of students in Azerbaijan or in Georgia or in wherever who want to learn English. And you are spreading U.S. diplomacy while you're teaching English as a citizen diplomat. Secretary Clinton likes to use the word citizen diplomat as a way to express the way that we are trying to engage American citizens to get involved in the work that we do overseas. So the Virtual Student Foreign Service, if you're interested, as I said, it's a chance to directly participate in U.S. diplomacy using students' skills and talents. It connects you with an overseas audience, and it's also an opportunity to work one-on-one with a foreign service officer. Most of you are interested in international affairs. Most of you are in the international studies school here. But for the average American citizen in Alabama, where I'm from, for example, no one has ever heard of the Foreign Service. And if you say that you work for the State Department, they say, oh, really, of which state? And so you really have to kind of educate them a little bit more about what we do as a foreign service officer. It's not their fault. It's actually because our jobs are overseas. You don't bump into us in the grocery store. You don't sit with us in a doctor's waiting room and have a pleasant conversation about what you do because we're not here. We're overseas. And so that's why a lot of people don't know what we do. But it gives students in the United States an opportunity to communicate with us, with foreign service officers one-on-one, and find out from the inside exactly what it is that we do and how they can get involved. So the Virtual Student Foreign Service is a way to change traditional internships through the State Department using 21st century statecraft. So in the past, an internship was one person, one mentor or one supervisor with one intern. Now, if you take the Virtual Student Foreign Service, you get one supervisor with lots of interns working on big projects that actually further U.S. diplomacy when you put all the pieces together. So the future of this is, again, my personal opinion of the future of diplomacy and the future of 21st century statecraft, it rests on social media. It rests on getting involved with the people, engaging them where they are, using the technologies and the networks that they're using. We can no longer stand back as a State Department and just let things develop and contribute our voice. We have to be out with the developments. We have to be there when the things are happening, with you when you're overseas, to provide those services to you and provide that information to foreigners who are interested in what the U.S. is working on. And I would just like to encourage you all that there has never been a better time to get involved with the State Department as a young person, as a student. There are so many opportunities, different programs through the 21st Century Statecraft Initiative to get involved with the State Department and to really get into a career in international relations and as a foreign service officer if you're interested. We are hiring at record numbers in the past 5-6 years, and a lot of the people coming in are people like you and I. Young people right out of college with fresh, innovative ideas who are pushing the State Department forward faster than it's ever really gone before. So that's the end of my presentation. I would love to take questions if you have any. And there's a microphone back there if anybody's interested as well.
So if you have a question, just raise your hand and please wait for the mic. That helps us with our recording here. So we'll go ahead and get started.
You mentioned that you work with students applying for visas to come to the U.S.
Uh-huh.
And I was wondering, for example, in the PhD program, when a student gets in, usually there's like fully funded and they get money like even to live. But I've heard that most students that happens to in Mexico, they still have to prove that they have the money to pay, even though they won't be paying anything. And a lot of them lose these opportunities when they get in. So is there anything being done to help these students since they already got in and they have a full funding and everything?
Yeah. So I actually adjudicate visas, or I did for the past year. I've been adjudicating visas, lots of student visas. And the requirements according to the Immigration and Nationality Act say that a student has to prove that they can afford the cost of the program that they're going to participate in. However, they do that through using a form called an I-20 or a SEVIS form. And on that form, the school itself, not the student, but the school is supposed to explain exactly how the money or where the money is coming from and how the money is being divided and the money is reaching the school. So if a student has a scholarship, the school will write on the form, full scholarship equals this amount of money. And then the officer doing the adjudication can see, okay, this student doesn't need to have the amount of money that the form says because the scholarship will cover what the cost of the schooling is. The part that may be giving students a problem is that on top of all of that, you also have to prove that you are not an intending immigrant. For most types of visas, you have to convince a consular officer or the person doing the visa interview that you aren't just going to disappear in the United States and never return to your home country. So although you have a full scholarship, if you don't have a really strong reason to return to your home country, that may be kind of an avenue that the consular officer can explore and determine whether or not maybe you're going through this whole process just so you can get to the United States and disappear somewhere. But we don't see that with students often. And students, the interesting thing about students is they're young and they don't really have an established life in the country where they grew up, because they've just graduated high school. Most of them never had a long-term job before. Many of them are still living with their parents. And so it's not like they have a really strong base in the country. And we know that. We understand that. And so for students, if they can convince us that they'll come back, then oftentimes they qualify for student visa. In fact, student visas are one of the biggest focal points of visa policy when we talk about it abroad. Is we focus a lot of our outreach specifically to students, trying to get them to come study in the United States. Any other questions? And at this point, it could be about anything. If you want to ask about 21st Century Statecraft, you can, or I'll take any other question about the Foreign Service. No? All right. Well, thank you so much for coming. I am going to make myself available for questions. The whole reason that I came was to talk to students like you guys. I am one of you. I was a student just 2 years ago. So I'll be around. I have plenty of time to hang around and talk with you guys if you want to talk about how to get a job in the Foreign Service, the virtual student Foreign Service, or kind of what 21st Century Statecraft really looks like. All right, thank you very much for coming.